Good afternoon. I'm Lori Odom with the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce, and I also have the honor of serving as the Secretary of the Board for the Japan Americas Society of Tennessee. Thank you for joining us for this first session of the Mitsui Lecture Series, made possible by the generous support of the Mitsui USA Foundation. Over the coming months, the Japan Americas Society of Tennessee will present 3 virtual symposiums highlighting Japan's footprint around the world and its contribution to Tennessee's prosperity over the last 40 years. Today's program features Nashville's booming technology sector and 5 IT experts who will share their knowledge and views on the use of technology by local manufacturers and healthcare companies to serve customers and grow business, and how Japanese companies are investing in technology and innovation that powers Nashville's economic development. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, President and CEO of the Greater Nashville Technology Council, Brian Moyer.
Thanks, Lori, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be able to moderate this very distinguished group of panelists that we have today. And as we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit of the general economic climate that we have here, and in particular, the tech sector and what's been happening over the past few years. So I am the CEO of the Greater Nashville Technology Council. We are a membership-based trade association focused on the technology sector in Middle Tennessee. We have approximately 600 member companies that range everywhere from pre-revenue startups to kind of a who's who of Nashville, including all of the companies represented by our panelists today. In terms of Nashville and what's going on, we had a recent report that says that currently Nashville has the hottest economy in the country so far for 2021, which is great news to hear as we're coming out of the pandemic and all of the uncertainty that has existed around that. Just like we did at the close of the recession back in 2010, we are coming out of the chute very hot from the lockdown that we've had over the past year, and we're excited for that. Many of you already know that the key drivers for our economy include, of course, our music and entertainment sector, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, and tourism. We don't align technology as a competitor to any of those key economic drivers, but rather we position technology horizontally across all of those as an enabler, and we will learn here in just a second how technology is enabling the industries that are represented by our panelists today. Currently, our workforce consists of about 62,000 workers, as reported by the joint report that we publish every year with MTSU, representing about an $8 billion economic impact from the technology sector. It's interesting to note that over the past several years, there's been a steady and growing stream of tech companies that have either relocated or expanded into Nashville. And they're coming here from all directions, but primarily from California, Chicago, and New York. In a recent report just out within the past few days, we were tagged as second in the nation in terms of the number of companies leaving California and relocating. Tennessee and Nashville was second on that list. Some other noteworthy news in terms of the growth of the workforce, which has always been kind of our metric for measuring what's going on in the technology sector, as opposed to trying to figure out the growth of the tech companies, because let's be honest, every company is a tech company these days. And so instead of focusing on that, we focus on the workforce in 3 reports that have come out in the last 60 days. The most recent being from DICE, the online jobs platform. It showed Nashville as 4th in the country over the past quarter, Q2, in terms of tech job growth. Just prior to that report was a report from CBRE, the real estate company, that showed Nashville being first in the nation over the past 5 years in terms of tech job growth, with a 36% growth over that period of time. And then just a week or so before that was a report out by LinkedIn showing that Nashville was second in the nation in terms of the growth of tech jobs over the last 12 months. So whether you want to look at the most recent quarter, the last 12 months, or the last 5 years, Nashville is leading the way in terms of the tech sector as far as the workforce and job growth, which in the end is really what it's all about, is what those jobs look like and how we're growing our workforce. We also see the result of the strength of our tech economy through the innovation that's taking place. Nashville, just 2 years ago, the last report that I've seen from the Kauffman Foundation showed that Nashville ranked 4th for startup growth in the nation, and we're one of only 9 Google for Startup tech hubs in the United States. There is a rich and very active startup ecosystem here, which goes back in many ways to what's being driven by the creative side of Nashville, going back to those iconic Music City roots that exist, where people for more than 100 years have been coming to Nashville with the dream of growing their music career. And it's a very entrepreneurial journey. And that's just kind of become baked into the DNA of our business community here. The population just seems to get what that is. And I think as a result of that, they're very supportive, and we see a lot of startup and entrepreneurial activity in the area. And then to further that thought process, and this is really getting into even more exciting news for me, is the IPOs that have taken place in the past 2 years, even in the midst of COVID, and some very, very significant exits that have taken place, the results of which are generating a whole new generation of millionaires and billionaires that are choosing to remain in town and invest those dollars and that new wealth back into our economy. That's really where the magic starts to happen. So needless to say, there's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement around not only the Nashville economy, but also the tech sector. And I'm actually very excited to be hosting the panel. If you'd like to join us and turn your cameras on, panelists, as we look at the impact that Japan and our Japanese-backed companies are having on our economy today. So joining me today from Bridgestone Americas is Cameron Aller, who is VP of IT for Customer and Commerce. From Nissan, joining us is Anshuman Kosh, who's IS Director for Marketing, Sales, After Sales, and Connected Car Services. Joining us from NTT Data Services is Jim Collier, who's VP of Digital Strategy and Innovation Practice with a focus on healthcare. And also from NTT Data Services is Edward Wilson Smythe, Senior Advisor, Industry Strategy and Solutions, focusing on manufacturing. And now I'd like to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves, say a little bit more about their background, and maybe a little bit of the scope and footprint that their companies have in the Nashville market. So Cameron, let's start with you.
Hey, good afternoon, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cameron Naylor. As Brian said, I am the Vice President of Customer and Commerce for Bridgestone Americas IT. What that means is my responsibility is supporting the customer-facing technologies that enable our customers, both from a B2B and B2C perspective across the Americas, as well as the enabling technologies and platforms to support our employees that we call our teammates, that also are customer-facing. I've been with Bridgestone about 6 years. And I've been in the Nashville area since 2006, so 15 years here as well. I currently live in Franklin. Bridgestone. Brian, did you want me to talk about Bridgestone's footprint here as well?
Yeah, if you want to just give some of the big numbers of what that represents.
Yeah, so within Bridgestone Americas, Bridgestone's a global company that's based in Tokyo, Japan, but our Americas headquarters is here in Nashville. We've been here about 30 years as a Nashville base, and have over the years, in the last 4 or 5, actually consolidated offices across the U.S. to be even stronger here in the Middle Tennessee area. I think we employ about 4,500 teammates, both in our corporate headquarters, our retail Firestone Complete Auto Care operations, as well as the 2 manufacturing plants that we have in Laverne and Warren County. All told, Bridgestone Americas accounts for a little bit over half of the revenue globally, as well as profit for the company, and we're traded on the Nikkei.
Excellent. Anshuman?
Yes, thank you, Brian. And you got my name correct, which I was a little surprised with that, but awesome. So, so hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Anshuman Ghosh. I'm part of Nissan ISIT leadership team. As Brian mentioned, I'm primarily responsible for marketing and sales, after sales, and connected car services. Similar to Cameron's background, I'm responsible for all dealer and customer, retail customer experience when it comes to the Americas. Been with Nissan for close to 3 years now, and moved to Franklin in early 2019, and love the area, of course. And as Brian said, a lot of wonderful things happening here. So as part of my role, one of the key things is to be really focused on all digital and global brands that we represent here, including mobile apps, dealer business systems, and a bunch of after-sales things, including warehouse management, as well as part and services. So it's a pretty broad span, and one of the fun things that really excites me every day in and out is the ever-changing landscape of what customer really wants from us, and that's always a challenging aspect, but love that aspect of it. So talking a little bit about Nissan, we are in this area for quite some time. The Nissan Americas headquartered is in Franklin, and we have 3 manufacturing plants in the US. 2 of them are actually in Tennessee, one in Smyrna, one in Deckard, and then we have one Canton in Mississippi. We also have a pretty big presence in the form of our design, engineering, and testing team in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And there's a bunch of test grounds, which I would love to explore one day in Arizona, where we test all our cool cars, and of course, a lot of other things happening there. So overall, I think we are right in itself in Tennessee. I think we are 10,000 plus when it comes to the employee level. And Nissan has been really investing in the U.S. manufacturing world. I think starting 1982, probably more than $12 billion invested there. We have produced upward of 18 million cars and 12 million engines. So we are here to stay for sure, and we love this area, and I would love to share more as we get started off with our discussions. Thank you, Brian.
Excellent, thanks. Jim?
Thank you. Jim Collier. I'm the Vice President of our Digital Strategy and Innovation Practice focused on healthcare. And the time for NTT and Nashville is extremely ripe. As Brian has mentioned, it is a magnet for tech talent. And one of the things we're doing is we've built our innovation center there in Nashville. We have brought over 350 jobs there, and it's a multifaceted innovation center there. It's both a delivery center where it's going to be the focus across the Americas of our consulting business for healthcare, and it may very well eventually be for manufacturing and other industry domains that we have. But it's also going to be an innovation center where we bring industry experts, we bring CEOs, CIOs, CFOs to bear, the C-suite in general to bear, to look at what is the next generation of activities. There are a number of trends impacting healthcare, never more so relevant than what's happened in the pandemic and the rebound out of the pandemic. It's changed our worlds dramatically, from virtual care, telemedicine, the ability to have a better patient experience. And so we're using the Innovation Center to drive all of those new innovations test them, figure out ways to make them real, and then bring them to the market. Nashville is extremely important to us, partly because the healthcare industry there is 4 times larger than the music industry, which is hard to believe because everybody thinks of the music industry in Nashville, but healthcare is 4 times larger in Nashville. And it brings literally over $40 billion of economic impact and over $400,000 direct and indirect jobs to Nashville. So healthcare is at the center of Nashville, and NTT is wanting to be at that center and driving it with our innovation center. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Jim. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself and your role with NTT?
Hi, thank you. Since Jim has already talked about NTT DATA, I think I get to talk about what I love to do, as people know me. So a little bit of background. I've been with NTT DATA for close to 2.5 years. My focus is in the manufacturing vertical, which is manufacturing, automotive, and energy. And it's really twofold. And we'll get into more of these discussions as we go further into the panel discussion. But part of it is helping our largest clients to develop innovation strategies, investment strategies to drive innovation, whether it's around Industry 4.0 or increasingly around customer experience and customer intimacy. And I'm sure Nissan and Bridgestone will have a lot to talk about those topics. The other part, and this is part of the reason that drew me to NTT DATA after 20 plus years in the market, is really about focusing innovation to see if we can harness that for the common good. So a lot of the discussion we're talking about is how do we create employment, how do we create magnets for skilled people, how do we use innovation to create partnerships with education institutions. So a large part of my work is also working with our clients and Brian with organizations such as yours to drive that agenda, primarily focused on the manufacturing sector. But as you mentioned, every client is a technology client. So that overlaps into the broader technology agenda that we have in healthcare or in public service to essentially drive that economic capacity creation across whichever communities we serve.
Excellent. So obviously we have a world-class set of panelists assembled today. We're going to start in with some prepared questions. I want to invite the audience to use the Q&A panel to type in any questions that you might like to ask of the panelists, and we look forward to trying to get to as many of those questions as we can. So my goals are to kind of take a look at why Nashville. We've heard a little bit of that, but I want to dig into why Nashville for each of these companies, and then what is the focus on technology doing in terms of workforce and the hiring that you're looking to do here, and then just talking about some of the cool stuff that each of these companies is planning to get into. And I think you'll find it a very fascinating conversation. So Cameron, starting with you. Nashville's been headquarters for Bridgestone for almost 30 years. What makes Nashville such an attractive place for Bridgestone to do business?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I mean, it's a lot of the same reasons why I moved 15 years ago. I think Nashville's been around as more of a good culture, good people, semblance of doing business and working with each other for a very long time. And I think that's been what's attractive for me as a person, as well as I think a lot of companies coming in. It's great in a lot of different ways. And I think we've seen that at a personal and cultural level over the years, whether it was the flood of 2010 that brought people together. Over the last year and a half, we've just been pounded through tornadoes and COVID and other major incidences in the city. And there's a resiliency of everybody here, right? That's great. On top of that, there's a change, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, that I think it's gone a lot more from more of a traditional Southern city to one that is a technology hub, and one that we see a lot of growth from a digital standpoint for Bridgestone. And as we go into what I'll describe later, our third foundation as an organization, that is a huge draw for us, where we see a lot of talent coming in, and even more attractiveness for Nashville being that central place from previous hubs on the West Coast, Chicago, New York, and such. So we see a big shift of talent that's coming in. We see an opportunity for growth at the same time that the company is trying to shift from being a traditional tire and rubber manufacturer, the largest tire rubber manufacturer in the world, to a sustainable mobility solutions organization. As we do that shift, there's going to be a huge amount of need for people in all sorts of technology skill sets, data and analytics, agile capabilities, cloud foundations. There's just a huge need that I think where our core was predominantly manufacturing to date. And as we automate and do a lot more digital engagement with our customers, that need to be able to build those seamless digital experiences will continue to expand. So Nashville really is a great spot to be able to recruit and retain people for a place that's pretty loyal to the city itself.
Anshuman, same question to you. And I'm sure there's a lot of overlap, but I'm interested to hear from Nissan's perspective and your perspective.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think Cameron and Jim and Ed kind of covered all the key topics. I think the key aspect where I would like to hone in, Brian, is really about the culture, right? I think the way as we are trying to approach, it's very important that one of the key things that when we are trying to attract talent is the location. Where is it located and what does the location offer? And that has been one of the key drivers for us, where we want to really make sure that we have that community support, we have that environment, which really not only supports the operation and the work, but also people's life. And that's a very important element. And that was one of the primary reasons, as we started off with the manufacturing unit in Smyrna, and which drove so much of transformation within Nissan as we, kind of moved from, again, California to Franklin. That was a key driver for us there.
So Jim, NTT DATA recently made their decision to expand to Nashville. Tell me, you touched on a little bit of this, but tell me what was involved in that decision and why you chose Nashville for your innovation center.
Well, 7 of the 11 of the largest for-profit hospital systems are headquartered in Nashville, believe it or not. And there's many other ancillary businesses that are healthcare provider systems and such that are headquartered in Nashville. Some of my clients are actually based there in Nashville directly. And as I mentioned, just the overall economic impact of healthcare in Nashville is extremely important. So it made logical sense for us to put the Healthcare Innovation Center right there in Nashville. And I'll agree with the others that the ability to attract talent has been foremost on our agenda as well. High caliber and high quality talents in the tech space. And the fact that, I think you mentioned it as well, that every business is a technology business now. Healthcare itself is now, it has been forever, but even more so now in the rapidly changing world after the pandemic. How to change the business and put it up on its ear, as well as not only new innovations to drive the business, but how do we bring innovation to bear to change the experience of the patients and the consumer. Basically, they all want the same experience they get from transportation or hospitality and things of that nature. So putting our innovation center there at the heart of where healthcare is and driving was very important to us. And Nashville brings that both from a people, quality of life, as Cameron mentioned, as well as the technology and enablement that is rampant.
Yeah, I talked about the number of companies, and I didn't list the logos or list the names, but NTT is certainly one of those that just recently has made the decision to expand into Nashville. And as I talk to almost all of these companies as they're coming in, and I ask the question, why Nashville? The first thing out of their mouth is workforce. And that's not to say that we have thousands of people just sitting around waiting to go to work for a new company that's coming to town. That relates to, one, an incredible network of colleges and universities, 20 different colleges and universities that we've got here with 125,000 students. And two, the fact that all three of these gentlemen have mentioned it's easy to recruit to Nashville because people like what's going on and they want to be a part of that, just like all of you chose to be a part of that and your companies chose to be a part of that. So it's actually very exciting to realize that and to be a part of what's going on here. Ed, I'm curious from your perspective. We've talked a lot about innovation. We're going to dig into that a little bit more here as we go forward, but do you feel that Japanese heritage companies approach innovation differently than other types of companies?
Oh, the first question is a loaded question. It could get me in trouble if I were a politician. So let me answer it like a politician partially. Anytime we make broad generalizations about, large economies or great cultures, we risk the chance of stepping into trouble. I can only give you my observations and what I have seen, having worked with multiple companies across multiple cultures and specifically working in NTT DATA right now. I think some of the nuances, and I'll ask my colleagues to, jump in and either agree or give a different perspective. Some of the nuances that I think do help us, and I'll just go down in no particular order. One is this belief in, balance. So balancing profits with social impact, deeply embedded in, I think, the DNA of all our organizations represented here. To what extent does that mean one particular culture is different than another? I'll leave it to the pundits. I just say it is something I see every day working in NTT DATA, which is a Japanese heritage company, to the extent that, one of our taglines is disruption for good. It's not disruption for profit. We take, of course, you disrupt to add value to your shareholders, but for good means you add value to your employees, you add value to your communities, you add value especially to the communities in America that have been left behind over the last 40 years of economic growth. The other concept, I think, is having a time horizon that is, not always tied to the quarterly, the quarterly routine that many of us are used to. That does give us the flexibility of thinking long-term. I mean, clearly, as Jim mentioned, investing in a data center or investing in a delivery center in Nashville, or as Cameron mentioned, being in Nashville for 20 years, these are not things you do because you can show a quarterly result. These are things you do because these are part of long-term strategies, long-term commitments, and long-term plans. So I think those are the two things that I think collectively, and I'll urge my colleagues to jump in if I am, and if they have different perspectives or can provide more perspective of what I'm saying. I'm going to provide a very solid basis for sustainable growth. And that's part of the reason why I joined NTT DATA, because great company, but more than that, it's good to have a company that's aligned to the values of we will drive disruption, but we'll do it for the broader good. We're going to make decisions, but we're going to make decisions that are sustainable. And it means sustainable in both senses of the word. Sustainable in terms of a sustainable business model, but sustainable because it drives sustainable business practices, socially, economically, environmentally. So I think those are the nuances that I've seen working in a Japanese heritage firm that do act as strengths and benefits to the broader community we serve.
Yeah, I'd agree with Ed. I think we have a mission that Shojiru Ishibashi-san in 1931 started with Bridgestone, which was serving society with superior quality. And that foundation has grown all the way through today, where our current CEO has said, what's good for society is good for business. And so, you may give up profits on certain things in the short term, but there is a very long-term play that I see a lot of the Japanese companies have. In addition to, I think what Ed said, there's also a notion of quality that I think is always built into everything that is done, and whether that's built-in quality for manufacturing, which nowadays translates into agile practices and digital, or what we've said within Bridgestone, we have some of our foundations, which is Shinshu Dokuso, which means creative pioneering, or Genbutsu Gemba, which is basically doing a walk in the steps of the end user, the person, and being able to have ideas that can actually better the products and solutions you're trying to serve. So there's always that notion of quality that I feel has been not just a part of the company, but ingrained in the culture. And in the few times I've had the pleasure of being able to go to Tokyo and visit the global headquarters, you really see that just ingrained in the DNA of every single person that shows up every day to be able to bring that quality to serve society.
True, very true. And, I think adding on, one of the key things for Nissan mission is actually enriching people's lives, right? I mean, it kind of flows through exactly what I think Ed, you and Cameron mentioned. And one of the key aspects is that, it's not only about what do we do, but how do we do about it, right? I mean, that whole sustainability aspect, be it in the product, be it in the communities that we are. And I think the key aspect, which flows through all of these themes is also how we improve the quality of life in the community where we operate. And I think that has been, I'm sure, a very common thing across the Japanese companies, which we are reflecting here, of where we want to encourage diversity, where we want to encourage the aspects of the people who are living in the area and make sure their lives are getting enriched with the kind of business we're doing, basically.
So with that in mind, and coupling that with some discussion that we had around workforce, there's a question from the audience that's come in that I think is very appropriate right now, and that is, how much of an asset for potential recruits would having Japanese language and culture actually be? So is that an asset as you're looking to hire, to hire somebody that has that kind of background?
I can maybe take a first crack at it. So I would say in certain roles, it definitely helps, right? Having that communication and having that knowledge of it. But primarily, I think we are really looking more for a cultural fit. And I would say, it's really primarily the diversity aspect, which is pretty big. And I can give my example, Indian guy sitting in Midwestern representing a Japanese company, right? So I think that speaks to itself. So I think primarily, when we are recruiting talent, be it in the manufacturing unit or be in the technology, I think it's really our first goal is the cultural fit with the kind of beliefs that we have as a company. And that will always remain the number one. Definitely having know-how of the Japanese culture, and if it's a very specific role, that always helps, right? Having that background aspect of it.
I would say I would echo that answer. It's a cultural fit. It can help understanding a variety of those things, especially the Japanese way of doing things. Much like Cameron said, it's not about necessarily profits, and even Ed said this about quarterly profits and such, but it's about a way of giving back to the world and a way of giving back to the community. And it's in for the long game at the end of the day. And especially in healthcare and having people think through the way that the dynamic of healthcare is changing. How do we make it better for the patients, make it better for the families, make it better for the practitioners and the doctors and the providers? How do we bring all that to bear? And there's a mindset to that comes from the Japanese culture, as well as multiple other things, that is very important.
Yeah,
So
I was just thinking tactically, maybe to direct answer some of that question. Within Bridgestone, about 4 or 5 years ago, our former CEO had made English actually the global language of Bridgestone. And it was incredible to see the Japanese, the actual workforce in Japan be extremely focused on learning English. I mean, it's night and day from 4 years ago, just how hard there was work in there. So is it a benefit? It probably doesn't rarely show up on a day-to-day basis. I think like Jim and Anshuman mentioned, there's a cultural element that is helpful in knowing, how to be able to think in cultural terms for a headquarters. But also, as I think Anshuman said, the diversity and inclusion of a very broad workforce, regardless of where they come from, is what we're all kind of looking for globally, and finding better ways to translate that between our different regions is extremely important.
So let's dig into what I consider some more a funner line of questioning here for me, and that is, and I'll start with Cameron. I'll get to each of you to talk about the technology that you're developing. But Bridgestone is known primarily as the world's largest tire and rubber company. But there's been a lot of news. It's hit Nashville, and I'm sure it's hit the world, about how the company is repositioning itself to be a leading technology company and solution provider through some very high-profile strategic acquisitions. What's behind this business transformation?
Yeah, and I'm sure Anshuman will have a whole slew of things as well, and we could probably talk about this for 3 hours. And Ed, sounds like within the background's got the same view. I think what if I'm being very honest, tires are extremely important to the company. It makes up the lion's share of our revenue, and it's the core of what we do, right? We historically have been a tire and rubber manufacturer, but the reality is the world of mobility is drastically changing and at exponential speeds faster than you can react. So you can either get in front of it and stay in front, or you can be left behind. And that's where we're seeing it with the mega trends that we're seeing out there. There's an acronym CASE, C-A-S-E, which is connected, autonomous, shared, and electric vehicles. That's shifting the whole way that the mobility industry is looking at the way that they treat as we say, the car park, the cars that are out driving around the United States, the rest of the world. In addition to that, in the shared economy, we're seeing this, what is also called fleetification. It's turning what is a normal, 2.5 vehicles in your driveway into more fleet usage. And we see Uber's doing that. And, in the world of an autonomous fleet of Ubers, those are where the business is going to be most distinct for a company like Bridgestone, is working with those companies that provide that fleet service. And those fleets are going to be driven by safety, trust, uptime, and both profit for maintaining cost per mile, but also sustainability. And that's where we're changing both the digital capabilities that we have to be able to provide insights off of telematics and different providers within these fleets, and to be able to take that data and insights and to be able to help the customer, the fleet provider, the original equipment manufacturer that needs to be able to create a better vehicle and a more efficient vehicle, as well as being able to give inputs back into a city of the future for better sustainability of the infrastructure that we have.
So this isn't exactly one of the questions that we had talked about, but it's related, and that is, to the extent that you're able, tell us something that none of us would know that Bridgestone is working on that really highlights this. Some examples of new technology and mobility solutions that you're working on.
Well, I don't think I could share everything that the rest of the world wouldn't know. I would say that there's a lot of real heavy lifting that is happening right now, both from the ground up, where we think there are business models that do not have a good penetration in the industry. There's a lot of partnerships and acquisitions that we're looking at. Most recently we're finalizing a deal with Azuga, which is a telematics company. We announced a partnership with an autonomous robotics truck company called Kodiak. And there are more partnerships along the way as we look to kind of building this wholly connected ecosystem, not just for tires, but for mobility, to be able to help keep that kind of sustainability going. So I think what's exciting is between our technical center in Akron, that does a lot of tire engineering, modeling, and R&D, and the work that we're doing here, there's some pretty crazy insights that we're getting on a regular basis. I'll use an example where we can see data insights would be, the easiest things to say that the tires would be able to tell you where models about when a tire is going to go flat, right? Or when you need to replace them. It's even better when it can inform an autonomous vehicle how to brake and steer better. It's even better when it's pulling road conditions, because the tires are effectively the skin on the road that can tell you when a road is too icy, or there are potholes that need to be evened out, or for a mining operator that needs to be able to smooth out their operations to get the most value for those trucks that are moving mining equipment back and forth. That's the type of data that right now we are pulling with some pretty big partners that I think are going to be exciting, that we'll see in the future.
Pretty cool stuff. Anshuman, how's Nissan locally driving innovation or innovative technologies? And I know you've got a big focus on the customer and dealer experience. So how does it tie into that?
Yep. No, I think what the world has seen in the last 1.5 years, with COVID, has probably accelerated a lot of these things. And as you mentioned, Brian, I think with the dealer and the customer experience, I think what we have seen is the landscape of how somebody's shopping has tremendously changed. And we always knew how the Amazons of the world operated, but as we all know, what has been Amazon's return in the during COVID period is pretty amazing, right? So Fortunately, within Nissan, we had started off thinking from the lenses of customers, before COVID time period, where we had really, started off in a journey. And I'm sure, Cameron, this will probably make very relative sense, where we started off with what we called our customer experience journey points. So we really have a customer journey prepared where we have 7 key steps in the journey of all the interactions, typically that, a retail customer would have with Nissan, and have really prioritized those journey points. And what I would like to mention about is one of the cool things that we were able to pull off, probably one of the pioneers in the OEM industry, is an end-to-end online shopping. And that is where I think we have a true e-commerce solution, which we launched a few months back. We're right from our Nissan Tier 1 website, sitting at your home, and we are calling this program Nissan at Home. You can shop at home, you can drive at home, and you can get service at home. So what that basically does is it ties in right from your online experience to the dealership experience. So on sitting at your home, you can decide a model, and you can request the dealership to actually bring the car to you. You test drive your car at your home. You decide to buy it. You just do everything, including signatures, at your home. And then when time comes that you would really need to get an oil change, maybe a service done, you get the service at home. You just book the appointment, somebody will come to pick up your car, service it, and return it back to you. And I think all of this plan was, proudly hatched at the headquarters here in Franklin. And obviously we worked with a lot of teams to make it happen. But we also wanted to make sure, we have our dealers right at the center of this, right? Because they are the ones who are actually selling the car. And this gives a lot of technology insights to our dealers regarding our customers' behavior and how the whole end-to-end works. So it's been pretty exciting times, really launching this one of a kind in the industry and driving it from right from Franklin.
That is very cool. It's easy to think of Nissan and just think of the manufacturing side of what you're doing in Tennessee, and not that part of the technology solution that's really from end to end for your customers.
Yep.
Jim, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, as I was listening to him mention all that about, all the services at home, it ties right into what I mentioned earlier about the changing dynamic and the trends in the healthcare industry about home healthcare. And, everything is turning around to being, how can you meet the needs of the consumer, whether it's in automobiles, whether it's in cars, telling them when the tires are going to be better suited for a given road or not, and such like that. But in healthcare, one of the things we're doing in our Nashville Innovation Center is driving home healthcare technology to bring to our clients so that they can make that dynamic move much more seamlessly and much more easily to bring all that to bear, much like, you can sit there and get your healthcare taken care of in your home while your car is being delivered to you, and while your oil is being changed and all that. It's because of the changing dynamic of what people expect. I blame it on the millennials because they have such high expectations, but it's changing that dynamic to be responsive, frankly. And so NTT DATA is bringing a lot of innovation to our innovation center there to try and make this all feasible, working with partners and trying to drive, our home healthcare command center with life sciences companies and medical device companies, as well as the doctors and patients, because the ability to have, as we've seen in the news, the ability to have beds available is sometimes, a deterrent to being able to provide quality healthcare. So how can you move those out and have better resources at the physical hospital where you don't need them, et cetera? And so innovation is at the heart of everything we're trying to do to bring a better experience to healthcare. And it's being driven by our Nashville Innovation Center.
Yeah, I just want to add on, as Jim mentioned, the millennials. In fact, the data JD Power states last year, the maximum number of cars or vehicles bought were the millennials, and the methods and the processes they used was truly very much digital, because they probably don't want to go physically to any particular location, as you mentioned, Jim, maybe even in the hospitals or the centers or a dealer in that matter. And by 2030, almost 50% of population will be millennials and Gen Zs. So I think the time is right, exactly to your point, Jim, that innovation already started, right? It's happening, and the customer demand is changed already. The way they're looking at how they want to do things are there, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to really catch up on that aspect.
Agreed.
So Ed, in a more general sense, how are manufacturers innovating to create value for themselves and their customers? Some examples have been described here, but do you have other insight there?
So I'd say, Anshuman and Cameron hit the nail on the head. I think, automotive is a very specific breed of manufacturer that have always been very customer-centric by the nature of the industry. Most manufacturers have historically been separated from the customer, again, by the nature of the industries, where you've treated retailers or distributors as your customers, and your end customer has been one step or two steps removed. I think the big shift we're seeing across all manufacturing verticals, automotive for sure, is always the case, but industrial equipment, industrial supplies, aerospace, where the focus on the end customer and understanding how they behave. And really, there's always the tendency to say we're going to create the grand unified theory of innovation, which may be an okay academic pursuit, but really taking the two things that Anshuman and Cameron mentioned, customers and data, and how to tie them together to create new value for yourselves, your customers, and your employees. The innovations we're seeing, across from, the smart platforms where, we have our own smart factory platforms that are automating and integrating shop floor operations across multiple manufacturers. But to the customer side, we're seeing how do you get the data, whether customer data or data that are embedded within machines, automobiles, the case examples in automobiles or industrial equipment, and really just leveraging the data to drive unique benefits. So after sales service is probably the fastest growing focus area for all types of manufacturers. And it's not just from the traditional sense of inventory management and asset uptime. Those are the metrics we used to talk about a decade ago. When you talk about after sales service today, it's all about how do I take the data that in many cases already exists? How do I map that to my understanding of my customer? And I'll go there and use the word persona. I think Cameron mentioned, or Anshuman mentioned the different types of customer segments you've looked at. And how do you really create value around that by driving that life cycle relationship with customers? So a lot of the investment in manufacturers is going towards core manufacturing operations excellence, which is a smart factory platform, supply chain integration, inventory optimization. But increasingly, we're seeing those as table stakes. Those are what are required to be competitive. What we're seeing as basis of competitive difference is really taking the data, customer data, asset data, market intelligence data, and driving real value. I just gave an example of after sales service. We can give an upsell of guided upsell and cross sell, which is all about how do I create value to the customer to buy more of my products, higher value products, by giving that personalized experience. And finally, when you turn that back into the workforce, we cannot forget this because it cannot just be about how do we create value to customers and create profits for ourselves. Manufacturing is also the industry that has been the hardest hit by the fourth wave of revolution, agricultural, industrial, financial, and then information, the fourth wave. If you go back to 1975, the 200 million manufacturing jobs in the United States, that's shrunk by 95%. So part of the innovation that we're all driving, and we can get into that in more detail, is how do you take those innovations to create those next generation employment opportunities? Part of that is upskill and reskilling, absolutely. Automation should not be seen as an adversary to the worker. We have a concept of help the human. How do you use automation to prove how the worker is effective to create more value-added job roles for the worker? All the way to new jobs that did not exist 5 years ago. We are experimenting with autonomous vehicles. Recognizing autonomous vehicles on the interstate highway system will have certain external factors that will determine the pace of adoption. But we are seeing a rapid adoption of autonomous vehicles in closed loop ecosystems, whether it's warehouses, whether it's airports, whether it's rail transit systems. there are ways to take the same technology innovation that's being driven by all of us and apply that to drive both enterprise value, customer value, but also community value by creating jobs related to all the new disciplines that need to be served in the future.
So with that in mind, Anshuman, I'm going to come back to you. Tell me how Nissan's focus on IT innovation and the cutting edge technologies are changing your hiring goals and changing what your employee base looks like here in Nashville.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would begin with saying I'll probably have to go on a campaign to probably steal some of folks from Cameron or Jim and Ed's team, because I think the technology base that we are really trying to go towards is very common, right? So I think one of the most I think important things, and I completely agree with what Ed mentioned, is we are innovating not only with technology, but we are really trying to drive innovation and drive insights through data. And I think that has become a very critical element of our skill set. And over the past few years, we have been really going through some major digital transformation efforts within Nissan, very similar to, I'm sure, other companies. And a couple of things which we have really focused on, Brian, is doing things like e-commerce, but also really about cloud first, mobile first, and having some of those core aspects has completely driven the kind of, I would say, the technology base that we want to use. So what that has led us to is really start focusing on how we can empower our people and employees and really upskilling them. And at the end of the day, we can have the best of strategies. And I love this quote. I don't know who had mentioned this. Culture eats strategy for lunch. And I think that's the best way to describe it. So if you want to really get into that digital innovation aspect of it, people always have to be the center and forefront. And so what I would say, Brian, is we have really started upskilling when it comes to AWS, comes to cloud. And I must say, Amazon in the market, I love it for Nashville. I don't love it for myself. They're stealing my people. So, so we've been really starting to get in front of, how we can really encourage training sessions for people. How can we have hirings? And at this moment, I can say we are already having 10 plus senior solution architects, which we are shooting for to get added to the team, driven by these things. So I think the demand has really come to a point where you're seeing across the board, the technology aspects, the skill sets, and how we really use this talent. The market is really, really hot.
So that's a whole nother conversation that we're not prepared to dig into, but I'm happy to have those conversations because we're right there every day in the face of that. So Cameron, let me throw that same question to you. And how's this focus on technology, this pivot that Bridgestone is making, impacting your hiring here in Nashville?
Yeah. Sounds like we're going to have a job fair shortly after this session here. I think kind of about the topics that were discussed earlier about our big shift towards digital and changes in industry. Also, I think the pandemic has created this new workforce of people that are looking to different cities, different options, Nashville being a very attractive area in that space. And we're taking the tack that, we want to be something of a digital startup in a giant publicly traded organization. In order to do that and have that innovative mindset, you need to have flexibility, people feeling comfortable to, as we call it, free to be your whole self when you come into the office, and to be able to have a very diverse workforce because there's tons of data that shows a diverse and engaged workforce is the most profitable and innovative companies that come out against the competition. So we're looking for a broad set of skill sets, both culturally, from male-female dynamics, different walks of life, to be able to bring in representations of our customer base. As we do that, we're casting a very wide net of people that we think can work in a somewhat hybrid environment where your workday may not be dictated by the meetings on your calendar, but rather, your life around you, with a commitment to being able to get the work done. And as we do that, then we'll start bringing more people back into the office as things start to ease back up. what that's allowing us to do is almost test and learn real world scenarios about what this new way of working looks like, what people want to do to be able to thrive and to be innovative, and how basic things like meetings are being conducted in the future. So from a recruiting standpoint, we're looking for maybe the non-traditional IT person that we would have looked for in the past, and a lot of the same skill sets. I'll probably just scrape all the job descriptions that Anshuman's posting online for the solution architects. We're looking for the same thing: cloud engineers, software engineers, solution architects, data scientists. A lot of areas that we're also seeing people shifting from previous careers in non-traditional technology sectors to development or project management. So those are kind of the things that we're looking for, creative ways how to be able to find a wider pool of talent and recruits.
I do vote for a job fair, by the way, Cameron.
Sounds good.
We'll talk. So Jim, I want to come back to you and ask about health equity and technology and what those words mean to you and who ultimately benefits.
Yeah, health equity, it goes beyond compassion. It's a smart business decision at the end of the day. I mean, everybody thinks of health equity as a compassionate sort of thing, bringing the right health to the right marketplace, but it's smart for business at the end of the day. It's designing, the better care model that brings equal access, affordability, diversity and inclusion at all spectrums of the health space. Health cannot be just for the rich. It can't be just for the entitled. It has to be for everybody, basically, all levels of healthcare. And so, we're helping. We have a number of clinicians in our healthcare consulting business that are helping drive that business dynamic and helping hospital systems, provider networks and stuff understand how they can make that real for the patients and the consumers at the end of the day. So it is extremely important in the ecosystem of the world, frankly.
So you're kind of at a disadvantage. It's 3-to-1, manufacturing and healthcare. So I'm going to come back and let you talk a little more. So as we talk about disrupting healthcare, and you've mentioned, that's kind of taking the care to where the patient lives. It's not necessarily in the hospital setting, and understanding that, the strength of our healthcare sector here are the providers who make their living in filling hospital beds. So how can NTT Data and your goals here to accomplish that take place and still benefit the very important provider community that we have here?
Well, at the end of the day, patient care is still between two people, the patient and the doctor, or the patient and the nurse. It's still a people business. But as we have seen in the news just recently, as the changes in the economic model of healthcare have been, having that experience be in person and with the actual providers in a hospital or in an office are not actually the norm anymore. And so, one of the things our innovation center is helping drive is how can we bring that technology, that innovation stuff to bear to still make it a personal experience, so that telemedicine and all of the different devices that need to be in somebody's home to monitor their blood pressure, monitor their vitals, monitor what's going on, and so that a nurse remotely can monitor that. We always think about outsourcing of IT, the good old-fashioned outsourcing of IT, and how that's been done and such. Healthcare is being outsourced in a way so that you're sitting in your living room, which is a much better place to recuperate and to get care in some cases than it is in a hospital system where it's very sort of sterile and there's a lot of noise going on and a lot of movement going on and stuff. If you're in a certain situation where you can get that care at home, but you've got the monitoring tools, you've got the ability to have a device and a tablet, or so you can talk to a nurse and a doctor immediately, and they're monitoring you real time, not unlike your security system is monitoring for somebody breaking into your house. They're monitoring your vitals real time and then talking to you right away as if they were coming in the room right across the hall. All of that is changing the dynamic of healthcare, but it's not impacting providers and taking it away from them. It's just making them better at what they do.
Great, thank you. One of the things that, and by the way, let's pause for 1 second. That there is one other question. I'll get to that question in just a second from the audience, but I've only had 2 questions. So come on, let's type some questions in. We've got some experts here. You need to take advantage of having them right here at your beck and call to answer your every question. So one of the things that I find exciting, and we take a very broad view of technology. And so kudos to the state for, I think, leading the charge in what I'm seeing in leveraging the traditional manufacturing kind of infrastructure that existed in Tennessee and migrating that to what I call, the jobs of the future. So we're moving from traditional combustible engine automobiles to electric vehicles and the battery manufacturing that goes along with that. It's really a brilliant way, in my opinion, to leverage a very extensive network of workers that we had and reskill them for these new jobs. So Anshuman, you're in this business. And so tell me what's the importance in your perspective or to Nissan in the electrification or in electric vehicles?
Right. I think it's a huge aspect of, Nissan's philosophy, as going back to one of the key things of how do we also ensure the sustainability as well as we are taking care of our environment. So Nissan's focus, as of now, we have mentioned that we want to be carbon neutral by 2050. And by 2030, we want to have more than 40% of the vehicles in the US fully electric with 0 emissions. So I think that statement itself probably is driving a lot of change, both from a technology aspect, but also from an aspect of what kind of cars we are going to produce. And, Nissan has a long history with EVs, which is electric vehicles. Leaf being one of the pioneers in the industry. We have been selling that for more than 10 years and more than 675,000 cars sold globally. One of the top ranked ones from a selling aspect. But what I'm really excited about, and I should have probably got a better picture, is the car behind me. And that is our fully electric crossover called as Aria. And that is coming up in the next few months. And very excited that that is something which we are really launching as one of our key vehicles will be as a part of Nissan. And the key aspect to that is kind of tying back to Ed, is the way we are looking at technology and electrification within Nissan. Car is one aspect, but I think the world is really moved on and evolving around all the what we call as off-board, right? What is not in the car, but how can you control and manage your car through mobile apps, to the capabilities that we give to the customers. And this car, Aria, is going to be fully loaded both inside and outside with the capabilities. So really looking forward to that. But obviously electrification is one of our core aspects that we'll see more and more, both Nissan and Infiniti brands as we go forward.
So where can we go for a test drive?
Yes, still gonna have go to nissanusa.com. You can have a test drive from your home, but it's still coming up. But yes, that's the way to go.
It's still going to have 4 tires though, right? Because Cameron will have an issue.
So far, yes. We're working on how to make it fly, but I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So we've got some questions coming in. I'll ask this question. I really don't think that this group is in a position to answer this question, but do you envision a time when Bridgestone, Nissan, et cetera, will utilize a Nashville Franklin headquartered bank versus a large New York or Tokyo bank?
That's what I would agree. That is beyond my expertise.
Beyond our pay grade.
Yes, beyond our
take
pay grade, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to read this because it just came in. Jim mentioned the growing trend of virtual care and wearable technologies that can monitor patients. What's Jim's response to patients who may be uncomfortable with continuous and somewhat surveillance-oriented approach to care? And how would he ease their concerns given recent scandals involving Facebook and other data scandals?
No, I agree. It's not for everybody, and it's not meant to be a one only one way to do this. If people still want to be in the hospital and still be monitored with an in-person care situation, they can still do that. So this is just, these sorts of things are just an ability to add a different dynamic to the patient care continuum, but it's not meant to be the only way. It's not where health systems and providers are pushing people out and saying this is the only way you can do it, because there is going to be a dynamic where there are people that don't want to have that happen, or they just flat out feel more comfortable having somebody closer by them and such. So it is a real problem and a real concern. The security of the data, the security of the capabilities and such, the reliability of it all. Technology and these things can be very daunting, and there's a whole population out there that doesn't trust it all, and I understand that and in some ways agree with it, but it is just another option.
And if I may just add to that, and I can just give a perspective around the work we're doing around the concept of technology ethics. I think the person who asked the question is spot on. There is justifiable apprehension of the erosion of privacy, the erosion of sovereignty, based on things we see around us every day. A lot of the focus of all our companies is around consciously focusing on how you shepherd that innovation to drive good. And part of that comes from the recognition that sometimes innovation can have a natural tendency to cause harm. The challenge in places like either employment equity, health equity, social equity comes from the fact that the very people who are institutionally disenfranchised by other forces are also disproportionately hurt by inadvertent bad effects of technology. And we talked about artificial intelligence. I'm very aware that it doesn't, there's facial recognition technology was misidentify me as a wanted criminal far more effectively than it would any of the other people on the panel. Let's be honest about that, right? So we at NTT DATA, and I'm sure our colleagues as well, take a very affirmative view towards a technology ethics that starts with a recognition that
Agreed.
you don't create technology ethics in a vacuum. It's not about creating a statement of technology ethics. It's about understanding the actual harm that can be caused by the very people we want to serve, and then affirmatively creating strategies to address the harm. That starts with that. The second is using that to gain the trust, which is the longer term effort. But starting with some of the work we're doing with our partners, such as Dell, such as Intel, such as NASDAQ, with the Alliance for Global Inclusion, it's not just about representation in the workforce. It's not just about having a place, as Brian, you mentioned, that I know it was Anshuman that mentioned that anyone can be their whole selves at work. It is also ensuring that the policies we develop, the technologies we develop, support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and do not harm the very people we should be helping.
Yeah.
So here's a question that's ripped from the headlines and that we've all been hearing about, and that is the chip shortage that ultimately goes back to COVID, and it's pounding auto OEMs and related industries. So as cars and tires and everything else becomes more smarter and connected, the risk of negative impact will grow. And we're already seeing delays in shipments, particularly in automobiles and EVs. So to the extent you're able to answer any kind of contingency plans that you've been thinking through to try and help mitigate that risk that kind of caught all of us by surprise.
Yeah. I think more of limited response to your point, Sir Brian, right? Obviously, there are a lot of internal stuff going on. But I would say one of the key things, which we have been working through with our marketing and sales aspect has been how do we really balance off the car ordering process, right? I mean, typically you would say if you want to buy a car, you would want to go into a dealership or go online, check availability at a dealership and say, hey, I like it and I want to buy it, right? I think we are seeing trends now where we are kind of going a little bit more towards, which I think more commonly happens in maybe Europe or in Japan, where you're ordering ahead of time, right? Hey, I want to have this car, And you know what, I understand with all the constraints going on, I'll probably get the car maybe 1.5 months out, or maybe we are going to be out by a couple of months. So we are trying to give that visibility basically through a marketing and sales aspect, so that when those things we are working with closely with our dealers, an aspect of how can we give a little bit better insight to our pipeline, which can enable some of these processes, which can help with the aspect of the chip shortage. And to your point, Brian, very true. I think the whole industry has been kind of hit with that, and we're kind of dealing with some of those different ways of how we can work with it.
Yeah, I think for Bridgestone, there's been an impact as far as our OE sales, but a huge part of our business is on replacement tires, as well as the services that sit around that. So, for us, we've had pretty incredible year to date, all things considered. I think what will happen that we see as a supplier for auto manufacturers is that there's this growing demand and backlog for new vehicles. So that demand has not died. It is just this wave that's shifting down. So we're making tires and replacing services as fast as we can do it. I don't think it's as much of an issue for us. It'll be an issue of when all of that plays catch up, how we manage the backlog of demand to be able to make sure that we're, servicing both the OE needs as well as the end user, the customer that needs that tire for their next excursion. So on top of that, we're also seeing more, road travel, right? Less air travel and more people taking longer road trips, and that's affecting miles on the road. I think probably the bigger thing for us is more of a systemic logistics and supply chain global issue. And I don't mean in Bridgestone specifically, but across the board. So, the Suez Canal took the whole country to a halt to some extent for a while, right? So I think what that's doing is across the industry is making us rethink how we're sourcing and probably diversifying the mix of sourcing a little bit better to have some hedge plans. But, for Bridgestone, I don't think we felt it as much as probably some of the other auto manufacturers did.
So let me, we only have a couple of minutes left, and we've had two questions almost identically come in, which I think are very important and a good way for us to close out. All of your companies employ thousands, tens of thousands of people. So as we talk about this digital transformation that's taking place, what programs do you have in place to try to upskill workers, whether they're coming from a manufacturing background or whether they're coming from an entry-level, help desk background, or to try and find opportunities for your existing workforce to upskill them, to move into some of these jobs that you said that you're trying to fill and wanting to hire for?
I'll tell you, at NTT DATA, we have an immense program for what I'll call our legacy employees. Obviously our new hires out of college come with an immense amount of skills, but those that have been around a while and those who have served well in certain things, but we need to transition them to new technologies and new capabilities that are at the forefront of what we're selling. We have an immense training program to get them certified, whether it's in AWS or Microsoft Azure or other technologies, be it AI and ML type, machine learning capability stuff. We have an immense academy basically to bring them up to speed and to do that and to get them involved in those activities so they get real world experience in it as well. And it's very important to us to give back to those people and to learn from them, because they bring a number of intrinsic values and other things with our clients, with their skills, with what I call the art of life, because the science is the technology, but the art is the knowledge they bring about that, how that innovation can be brought to bear. So it's important to us to do that.
So 1 minute responses from anybody else?
I would say very similar thought process to Jim. I think we are all doing a massive training campaign. The only one thing I would add on to top of that is we've tried and create very specific roles where we're encouraging, our team members to really get focused on specific roles. And it can be very specifically also related to SMEs. And we are finding it very, very valuable, where I think to Jim's point, that knowledge base is of years is invaluable for us, so beyond just training on one track of technology, we are really trying to use that knowledge from an SME angle. And so far that has worked out really well for us.
Great.
Yeah, I think
Cameron,
we're initiating what we're calling your IT journey, which is trying to create more focused development towards those key areas that we see the digital transformation happening. I think Jim mentioned it. So could be cloud-based DevOps and agile capabilities. It could be digital security training programs that we have. We're scaled agile framework training for Scrum Masters and product owners. There's a lot of that that's all happening in parallel, and sometimes it's hard to find time with all the work that is going on and the development, and that's where we're getting a little bit more focused to having some targeted training programs that support the upskilling of teammates towards those future capabilities, because it's going to be as easy to retain talent and grow them as it is to be able to try to find talent outside. So that's the only way it's going to happen, is a mix.
Well, I want to thank all of you. I mean, what a phenomenal panel. It's been great. I've learned a lot. Hopefully our audience learned some things that they had no idea what was going on with these large Japanese companies right here in our backyard. And I also want to thank the Mitsui USA Foundation for sponsoring this event. Hope to see you all soon. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.